very cool music. I was a bit disappointed I didn't have a cool little runway thing to walk down, but it's been very inspiring for me to be here this evening. I would love there to be an AFLW para branch, but we'll work on that. I don't think I'm ever going to be as fast as Zippy Fish, so I'll work on that as well. I am very honoured though to be here tonight to deliver your toast and to celebrate not only our new AFLW Sydney Swans players, but to give a nod to the entire team as we head into a very new and exciting season ahead of us. Now, my name is Ellie. I'm a recently retired para-athlete. I've just completed, I know I don't look old enough, but a 16-year swimming career on the Australian swimming team. But this evening, I really want to share with you a few of my experiences and observations from sport now that I have retired and I've had an opportunity to reflect back on my career and what sport has really taught me. Now, I will just warn you that over the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to sound extremely self-centered at the beginning of this, but I do need to share a lot of my stories to then create the meaning out of them, which I suppose is the whole point of reflecting on a career, and also it's probably just the swimmer inside of me as well. We are quite self-centered. Now, I do know that we do obviously compete in very different sports, but I certainly do feel an extremely deep connection to this team. You know, like you, I have spent my entire sporting career in a world that wasn't necessarily ready for me at the time when I began. And I know what it's like to be part of a movement such as this, that sometimes does have to fight for its place at the table. And at times as well, feel like we're always having to constantly prove ourselves. But I can promise you, it does make you a stronger athlete at the end. To give you a little bit of context, I did mention Paralympic athlete. Yes, I am an athlete with a disability. But I was actually born as a perfectly healthy, able-bodied girl. But there was this one night in 1993 where I was unexpectedly diagnosed with cancer. I was just 2 years old. Now, this cancer diagnosis completely, as I'm sure you can imagine, turned the lives of my family upside down. And we did try our very best. But after a year of chemotherapy and a year of clinical trials, my parents had to make this decision that no parent should ever have to make for their young child, and that was to take my leg away from me. Now, disability was very different back in the early 90s. You didn't see people with disabilities really in the workforce. Media portrayal was very negative at the time, and my parents were scared. And the reason why they were scared is because they thought that no opportunity was ever going to come knocking on the door of their daughter, who all of a sudden found herself with a disability. Now, as soon as I came out of the operating theatre, I was branded with this word, disabled. And another fear that my parents had is that they were just so worried that their little girl was going to come out of this operating theatre completely different. But I have since been told that 24 hours after my operation to take my leg away, I was zooming up and down the hospital corridors on a skateboard with my twin sister. And they kind of saw in that moment that everything was going to be just fine, and I was exactly the same girl that I was before. But it was during surgery that I was fitted with my first ever prosthetic leg. And on this prosthetic, I had to learn how to do all of the simple things again. You know, I had to learn how to walk, I had to learn how to run slowly, to climb trees again. But I was very fortunate to have my twin sister by my side. Now, she really did take me by the hand, and there's all this family footage of her picking me up every single time I fell over. But over time, my twin sister began to, piece me back together again until I didn't feel any differently from the kids that I was growing up with. What was really impressive about my twin sister in particular is that even at the age of 3, she taught me that I still had the world at my foot, even if the rest of the world saw me in a very different way. Sport was never actually mentioned to my family during my rehabilitation, but swimming was. That's how I got into swimming. It's a great sport to reduce the impact. Probably not like AFL, it's quite an impact sport, but swimming, I threw myself in there. And yes, I did go around in circles for a couple of weeks, but I was chasing my sister, so it didn't take me very long at all to swim in a straight line. But it was a really brilliant way for me to be able to test my physical limits every single day. And I could take off this really heavy prosthetic, and I could jump in the water and feel like every other kid around me. Now, I never really imagined in those moments going through that rehab time that it was going to be the start of this whole new world for me. This swimming pool, this place of sport where I could really find myself, find who I was, and test myself every single day. And so my swimming story does start in the rehab pool, but my dream of actually becoming an elite athlete began when the Sydney 2000 Olympics came right here to Sydney. And like any other kid in Australia, I fell in love with the Olympic heroes. They were honestly gods to me. I remember, I had pictures of Ian Thorpe, who I really wanted to marry, and it was never going to happen. On both of our accounts, I will say. And, Susie O'Neill, Petrea Thomas, absolutely plastered my walls. And I had this dream, like every other kid did in Sydney at that time, was to become an Olympian. But I was never going to become an Olympian because no matter how hard I tried or how hard I trained, I was never, ever going to be as fast as the Olympians that I was inspired by. Now, I didn't know anything about the Paralympic Games. It wasn't on print media, televisions. Social media didn't exist back then, guys, so there was no way for me to be able to consume Paralympic content. But I remember in 2004, I was just flicking through my TV and I came across the Paralympic Games and I couldn't believe what I was watching. And I was watching athletes with no vision. They were playing football with a bell inside of a ball, so there might be a para-AFL thing there. I remember seeing seated volleyballers and athletes with no legs. They were bounding down this athletics track on these things that looked like springs. But I remember it really lit something inside of me. And I'm sure that this is a story that everyone in this room can resonate with. All of a sudden, I couldn't wait to become a Paralympian. There was a pathway there. There was an option for me there. And so I trained extremely hard. I made my first Australian swim team when I was just 14 years old. I went over to South Africa, and my biggest competitor at the time was this athlete named Natalie Dutoit. She was so fast that in Beijing, at the games there, she was going to qualify, or she did, qualify for both the Olympics and the Paralympic Games. And so in the Paralympic world, she was undefeatable. And it was at these World Championships when I was 14 that I flew home with a silver medal in my back pocket right behind Natalie. And there was this, thank you, you don't need that. I get really embarrassed by that stuff. But I remember, there was all of this talk on pool deck that I might be the one that may be able to defeat this undefeatable athlete. And so I went home and I gave it everything that I had. And I trained with this vision of this gold medal around my neck, something I dreamed of since the Sydney 2000 Olympics. Now, it did take me 6 years to beat her. And I know that you understand how much 6 years of work is every day. But I remember at the London 2012 Games, not only did I beat Natalie and win that gold medal that I'd been chasing my whole career, but I'm not going to say it because you guys all applaud that. I won a few of them. But I remember I was standing on the dais in London 2012 on the number one spot years and years after this dream began. I had this heavy gold medal around my neck. I had Natalie, who I beat her on her retirement race, which made me feel awful. So she was a bit teary, and I kind of took that moment from me a bit. But I remember, having my family in the crowd and thinking that I'd honestly achieved everything that I had ever wanted in my life. And I knew that my life was going to change when I got home, just like Thorpe's did, and just like Susie O'Neill's did. But my life didn't change when I got home. The only people that were waiting for me were my parents at the airport. But it was really interesting back in that time. I was always made to feel very different to the Olympians. I was almost made to feel, in a way, invisible. In fact, that year at the Australian Sports Awards, I was nominated for Australian Junior Athlete of the Year, and I was tipped to win because I'd won, I'm going to say it now, 4 gold medals. And I defeated someone who was deemed to be undefeatable, but the award was instead given to an Olympian who had won a single silver medal. And I remember I stood there and I smiled, but I still felt invisible. And of course, I'm not discrediting who would love to win an Olympic silver medal here. It's an amazing achievement, but I knew in that moment that there was certainly a divide between able-bodied athletes and Paralympic athletes in the way that we were seen in public. Now, after those London 2012 Games, I told you I was going to sound really self-absorbed here, but I promise these stories have meaning. I did require a double shoulder reconstruction due to my training efforts. And when you're a leg amputee and you're walking around the streets of Sydney with both of your arms in a sling, you get asked a lot of questions. And I used to tell people I had a skydiving accident and people believed me. But then when I told them that I did it from swimming too much, then no one believed me. But I remember after a year of recovery through these shoulder reconstructions, I jumped back in the pool again. And that first stroke back into trying to become the best in the world was probably one of the proudest moments of my whole career. Now, if we fast forward to Tokyo, almost a decade later, because I don't have hours, sorry, but Tokyo 2020 was on the horizon. I was a much more experienced athlete. I was 29 years old, and in the lead up to these games, I began training full time with two of the fastest Olympic sprint freestylers in the world, in Kate and Bronte Campbell. I was very fortunate to become the first Paralympian to join an Olympic training program in Australia, and I remember thinking when I was younger that I would never ever be as fast as the Olympians that I was inspired by as a young girl, and now I almost was. I remember that I finally felt what it was to be an Olympian, but it was the hardest 2 years of training in my life. My coach used to love to send me off the blocks like 2 seconds before the girls, and then he would unleash them on me. And nothing will make you swim faster down the pool than Kate and Bronte Campbell chasing you. But I remember I woke up every morning and I was just so proud of myself. I was very tired and very sore, but I was incredibly proud. And then 2 years into this training program, I slipped in a wet driveway and I broke my hip in 2 places. And then a few days after that, the world was in lockdown with COVID-19 and the games were postponed by a whole year. I'm sure we remember that. So that was a really shit week for me. But I remember over the next 12 months throughout this pandemic, I had to train for this aquatic sport in a 2-bedroom apartment in Hornsby with a broken hip. And I didn't even know where to start. I'm like, do I hold my breath in the bathtub? Like, I do not know what to do with this. But we were presented with this huge challenge as athletes, and like many others during COVID, we had absolutely no choice other than to find a solution. Once again, like my amputation when I was younger, like my shoulder reconstructions, I just had to adapt to this whole new lifestyle, and I absolutely relished in the chance to push myself in a completely different way this time. But overcoming this challenge of training in a 2-bedroom apartment with a broken hip for an aquatic sport, it ended up becoming one of the proudest moments of my whole career to be able to get to the other side of that. And by the time we did arrive in Tokyo, a year later than we had planned to, I was 29. Our Paralympic team values of being loyal, proud and fierce was something that was always reinforced in us throughout our time in COVID. And it was something, these loyal, proud and fierce values, these were values that we looked to as we competed at a games in the middle of a pandemic. Like, I can't believe that happened. But I remember it was a momentous games. Para-athletes finally achieved pay parity to our Olympic counterparts in the form of medal bonuses. And it was probably one of the proudest moments of my career. And I remember winning my 17th medal at those games, and I was like, I wish I got back pay for this, but I'll take it. But at the conclusion of Tokyo, I had won 17 medals during my career as an athlete. I just loved playing sport. That's all that there was to it. But it did stamp me as Australia's most decorated female Paralympian in Australian history, which looks awesome on my LinkedIn profile and my resume. But because of this, I was asked to carry the flag for Australia at the closing ceremony. And I was at the end of my career, right? And I was at the closing ceremony on my own because no other athletes could march with me. And I really began to think about what sport had taught me throughout my life. You know, I was at the very end, I had to sit by myself for 2 hours. And at the closing ceremony, I was looking around and I saw an athlete representative there from every single country in the world. And I was looking at these athletes and I imagined that they'd all begun their journey in a very similar way that I had. In saying that I was just once this little girl who didn't even know that I was different until someone else told me that I was. And because of this, I'd always tried to hide the parts of me that were different. And I'd always tried to be something that I wasn't. I'd always tried to be an Olympian. Everything that I did, I tried to emulate what an Olympian would do. But here's the thing, and it took me a very long time to realise this, I wasn't an Olympian. I was a Paralympian, and that didn't necessarily mean that I was less than. And it really got me thinking about my friends and my family back at home. And I was thinking that most of us, if not all of us, at one point in our life, we're going to hide some part of ourselves. We're going to hide parts of our identity, we're going to hide parts of our culture, our sexuality, our ability, our disability, because oftentimes we are so afraid of feeling judged or feeling less than the person who's standing next to us. And although it took a while, the opportunity of the Paralympic movement, it taught me to actually dial these parts up and to own exactly who I was. And it's really important that I was able to do this because I realised that I needed to be this role model that I never had when I was growing up. I just wanted to be like Susie O'Neill. But I had to show these little Ellies of the world that were going to grow up, that they don't have to necessarily be defined by anything that's happened to them or the parts of themselves that make them different. But they can actually use these parts of themselves to be authentic in exactly who they are. They can be very vulnerable with each other and connect in the best way possible. And this is what I really missed when I did an individual sport. I really wish that I had played a team sport to be able to do this. Ultimately, though, we just have to be loyal, proud and fierce of exactly who we are. The Paralympic Games, AFLW, movements such as this, it really is an opportunity that the whole world needs, and it really needs it. These are movements that intentionally alter the status quo, and along the way, movements such as this one in this room tonight, it inspires millions and millions of people across the globe to limitless opportunities and possibilities when we level the playing field. Now, obviously, I go on social media all the time and there's all of these arguments about why we should be levelling the playing field, and it's a question, why should we? From what I've seen in the Paralympic movement is because it quite literally shapes what people think is possible or not. People see themselves reflected in you every single day. And that's exactly why I wanted to be here tonight. I know that this isn't just about footy, and I hope that you can see that as well. It's what you represent to the young girls in the crowd, to people who feel like they don't quite fit the mould of who they grew up watching on TV, and to the fans who have these new heroes to cheer for because you have finally made a space for them. Now, when I first began to swim and when I first began to race, I never really truly saw the impact that sport could have. I honestly just cared about winning and losing as well. But over the last 15 minutes or so, I have never once mentioned that my proudest moments ever came from standing on top of a podium. It was the times when I really challenged myself, throughout the days where I didn't know if I had anything left to give. I'm so sorry that you guys are in the thick of that as well right now. It's really nice to be retired. When I grew up in a world of sport that wasn't necessarily made for people like me, through a broken hip, double shoulder reconstruction, COVID, challenging myself in a whole new way in training with Olympians, obviously through securing pay parity for future para-athletes so they never have to feel any less valued than those around them. But I think the most important thing that I'm so proud of when I reflect on my career is through showing the whole world that it's actually that we are all valued and that it's the parts of us that are different that actually do make all of the difference. Never ever did I imagine that this is the thing that sport was going to offer me. So as you head into the new season, especially to the new players on the team, please take this very, very special gift of sport with you wherever you go. And make sure that you always lean into the challenges. Let this season and all of the seasons that come before you, let them stretch you, let them break you open in all of the best ways. Let them teach you when things get hard, and they will, and remind you of what you're capable of when you think that you've got absolutely nothing left to give. Let it shape your friendships, which I've seen a lot of them tonight, but your courage and your voice as well, because that is going to be so incredibly important. But when you give yourself fully to something such as the AFLW, when you give yourself fully to footy, it will give you back a version of yourself that is loyal, proud and fierce in every single way. I honestly never imagined that this is what sport was going to offer me. Because of this, now when I reflect on my career and my life, I wish more than anything in this whole world that I could go back to 1994 and tell my parents who were sitting in this oncology ward, who were so scared, that everything was going to be just fine. That because of sport, I would find my team and I would find my people, and that it was going to be fine. I was still going to be a little shit of a kid. And I must say, speaking of my parents, I obviously think of them quite often. My dad actually has always told me this, and this is something that I really want to tell you guys so that you take it throughout your season, but he said that there's always 4 types of people in this world. He said that there are those that make things happen, those that watch things happen, those that wonder what happened, and then there are just those that don't know that anything is happening at all. But let me just say this, don't wait for the rest of the world to catch up. Congratulations to the new players on being the ones who make things happen, and to the rest of you as well, the rest of the team. Make sure that you push each other, you back each other, you challenge the narrative of what it means to be a footy player every single time you pull on the red and the white. Remember that you are the movement, you are the role models, and you are what every young player in the pipeline is dreaming of becoming. Even me, I can't wait. So with saying that, let's raise a glass to this season, to this team, and being the ones to make things happen.